Good afternoon, co-chairs Westerfield and Elliott. I don't need the slides. I'm going to condense my brief a little bit. You all have some slides. I think those will generate further discussion on down the road as this concept becomes actual draft legislation. I'd encourage you to read those. I'd love to discuss those either in response to questions here in this committee meeting or later on in individual meetings with your offices. But I do want to focus the predominant amount of our time and give that over to affected parents and children who have lived out this experience so that you can hear directly from them. In states that have passed caregiver consideration legislation, they often implement such a law in the form of caregiver mitigation and diversion programs. Now, these programs are triggered at the time of criminal sentencing. The states that have done this include Missouri, Illinois, Massachusetts, California, Oregon, Washington, and Tennessee. As far as federal legislation on this point is concerned, companion bills have been introduced in the House and the Senate. Both of them have been referred to committee, and that's where they remain. This is essentially a three-part function that any sort of caregiver consideration would require. Number one, the judge would be required to determine that he or she is about to sentence a primary caregiver. Obviously, part and parcel to that determination is a review of the actual criminal history of that individual and the nature of the offense at issue. Every state that I've reviewed has exclusionary criteria for either criminal record or the at issue crime that excludes offenses such as violent offenses, sex offenses, serious offenses, and offenses involving the use of a firearm. Now, assuming that there's a qualifying offense that doesn't exclude that primary caregiver, the judge would essentially waive the sentence to incarceration and instead order the same punitive term to be served in community supervision, along with a treatment and programming plan as appropriate for that particular individual's rehabilitation and recovery. Such treatment programming often includes one or more of the following: substance abuse treatment, physical or sexual abuse counseling, vocational or educational services, anger management, parenting classes, and family counseling. Now, you're going to hear a lot of rationale in support of this legislation, but I want to key in on one that often fails to garner the attention it deserves. I propose to you that if Kentucky were to implement some form of caregiver consideration legislation, it stands to save this Commonwealth almost $64,000 per eligible parent who is essentially subject to community enforcement as opposed to incarceration, and that's also including the dollar amount that Kentucky would spend on foster care, and that includes an offset for the cost from Kentucky Department of Corrections for supervision within a community. I think the 382, I believe, self-reported children who were impacted by this legislation and the unknown 6,100 additional Kentuckians that are incarcerated provide ample opportunity for legislation in this space to save money, to preserve the family unit, and to do what is best for these parents, these children, and the community. I thank you, Co-Chair Westerfield, Chairman Elliott, and distinguished members. I welcome any questions that you may have, and I'd like to turn it over to some people who have lived this experience.